You think your paycheck is shrinking because of inflation, but your zip code is actively plotting your bankruptcy. Step outside into the heavy, stagnant air of a forgotten county. Smell the faint, metallic scent of rusted factory gates, and listen to the hollow sound of a siren wailing in a neighborhood that has not seen a street sweeper in 10 years. The American dream did not just fade away in these places. It was foreclosed on, stripped for copper wire, and sold to an out-of-state holding company. Today, we are tearing apart the 10 poorest states in the United States for 2026, where the median income is a mathematical insult, and survival is an exhausting, daily gig. The top 3 are absolute nightmares of systemic failure, but the state sitting at number 1 is bleeding residents so fast, and you might be packing your bags to move there right now because the rent looks cheap online. No myths, no filters, just reality. Number 10 is Tennessee. The neon glare of Broadway in Nashville blinds the tourists to the rusted, sinking trailers sitting just an hour outside the city limits. Tennessee has one of the highest combined state and local sales tax rates in the entire country. They aggressively brag about having no broad-based income tax, which sounds like a massive win for your wallet. But the state mercilessly gouges you every single time you buy a gallon of milk, a pair of shoes, or a tank of gas. Therefore, low-income households end up paying a massive, disproportionate percentage of their meager earnings just to survive the week, trapping them in a brutal cycle of poverty. Rural living here means a total lack of access to decent education, reliable healthcare, and jobs that pay anything above the bare minimum. A local on a community forum summed it up perfectly, saying, "I love paying nearly 10% tax on a loaf of bread, while the bachelorette parties puke on Lower Broadway for free." Would you rather deal with zero income tax but massive sales tax on everything you buy, or just let the state take a flat cut from your paycheck? Drop your choice in the comments right now. If you think getting taxed into oblivion on groceries is brutal, wait until you see what happens when a state bets its entire economy on a coastal postcard. Number 9 is South Carolina. The thick, swampy humidity of the Lowcountry settles over a crumbling 2-lane highway that has not seen a paving truck since 1998. South Carolina markets its slow pace of life and coastal beauty, but behind those million-dollar golf courses lies a median household income of just $59,318. The state historically relied heavily on agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. But the global economy moved on, and isolated rural workers were left completely stranded without a modern backup plan. Therefore, a massive labor shortage is crippling the remaining industries, because people simply cannot afford to commute massive distances from the rural dead zones into the cities just to work a low-wage job. High poverty rates, failing education systems, and deeply flawed, crumbling infrastructure are hurdles this state simply cannot clear. As one exhausted local posted on a neighborhood app, "We have luxury resorts right down the road, but the local high school ceiling leaks every single time it rains. You can buy a cheap house in the Pines, but the stress tax of navigating a broken system will drain your bank account anyway." And if you think a broken tourism economy is bad, wait until you see a state that let an oil boom completely destroy its foundation. Number 8 is Oklahoma. The metallic, gritty taste of dust blows off an abandoned oil derrick right next to a cracked highway that eats tires and ruins suspensions for breakfast. Oklahoma is choking on its own economic choices, dragging along a median household income of barely $55,826. The state bet its entire future, its tax base, and its workforce on fossil fuel production. But global energy markets are incredibly volatile, and prices crash without warning. Therefore, when the oil money dries up, the state budget completely craters, leaving vital infrastructure and schools totally starved for cash. The American Society of Civil Engineers literally gave Oklahoma a humiliating grade of C- for its overall infrastructure. This foundational collapse cripples the state's ability to foster any new job opportunities, leaving a poorly skilled workforce completely abandoned by modern employers. A local resident vented on a community thread last week saying, "They finally fixed the potholes on Main Street, which is great, except now the getaway cars do not bottom out after they rob the pharmacy, so I guess we call that progress." If an oil bust sounds like a financial nightmare, Wait until you see the absolute ghost towns created by the death of the American coal empire. The sound of a rusted window air conditioning unit violently vibrating against a rotting window frame is the official soundtrack of Number 7, Alabama. When you step outside into the 95-degree swampy heat, you immediately realize that the state has entirely given up on its rural population. Alabama actively refused to expand Medicaid for years, which triggered a catastrophic chain reaction of rural hospital closures across the state. Therefore, working-class families are left stranded, often forced to drive 45 miles down crumbling, unlit county roads just to reach a basic emergency room. The median income here hovers around a depressing $59,000, but that number is heavily skewed by the few wealthy suburbs scattered around Birmingham and Huntsville. Beneath that superficial metric, the reality is a crumbling tax base, eroded by decades of systemic neglect, leaving local municipalities totally starved of the funds needed to pave roads, fix bridges, or pay teachers a living wage. A frustrated local on a community forum recently painted the exact picture, saying, "My property taxes are low, but I just had to drive an hour with a broken arm because the local clinic turned into a dollar store." You are saving a few $100s a year on taxes, but you are paying for it with your life expectancy. If you think a collapsing healthcare system is a tragedy, wait until you see a state where the entire geographic identity has been strip-mined and abandoned. Leaving the Deep South, we hit a wall of freezing Appalachian fog at Number 6, Kentucky. You can physically smell the damp, decaying coal dust mixing with the wet autumn leaves, a lingering ghost of an industry that packed up and left the locals to rot. The state is violently divided into two completely different realities. On one hand, you have the pristine, multi-million-dollar horse farms of Lexington, protected by perfectly painted white fences. But if you drive an hour east into the mountains, you hit a brutal economic dead zone where the median income crashes down to roughly $58,000, and the poverty rate skyrockets past 16%. When the coal empire collapsed under the weight of cheaper natural gas and environmental regulations, it took the entire municipal tax base with it. Therefore, the state suffered a massive brain drain, as anyone with a degree or a trade skill immediately packed a moving van and fled across the border to find a sustainable paycheck. As one exhausted resident mentioned on a local thread, they keep promising tech jobs are coming to the mountains, but the only thing hiring is the new gas station on the highway, and they want 10 years of experience for $12 an hour. This brings up a real, undeniable question for you. Would you rather stay in the dying town your grandfather built and slowly go bankrupt, or pack your bags, abandon your roots, and move to a crowded city where you know absolutely nobody? Drop your survival choice in the comments below. As dark as that choice is, it does not compare to the corporate irony waiting for us in the next state. At Number 5, we find a brutal, inescapable corporate irony in Arkansas. The metallic, sterile smell of massive poultry processing plants dominates the air right off the interstate, reminding everyone exactly who owns the town. Arkansas is famously the birthplace of the most powerful retail empire on the planet, generating billions in global wealth. But the locals walking the aisles of those exact supercenters are completely trapped in a low-wage gig economy, scraping by on a median household income of just $55,000. The state has essentially engineered a permanent underclass by relying heavily on low-paying agricultural processing jobs, massive distribution centers, and a deeply flawed educational system that fails to prepare students for a modern, tech-driven workforce. Because the local economy is anchored to retail and poultry, social mobility is statistically paralyzed, meaning if you were born poor in Arkansas, the math says you will almost certainly die poor in Arkansas. A local worker summed up the grim reality online, posting, "We literally live down the street from the wealthiest family in the world, and half my neighborhood is financing their groceries on high-interest credit cards." When the system is designed to extract wealth rather than build it, the working class becomes nothing more than a disposable resource. And if you think corporate extraction is the worst thing that can happen to a town, you have not experienced the environmental and financial extortion happening right now on the Gulf Coast. The suffocating smell of sulfur and chemical exhaust burning your throat on a humid summer night welcomes you to Number 4, Louisiana. They affectionately call the industrial corridor Cancer Alley, an ironic nickname for a stretch of the state that has sacrificed its own citizens for petrochemical profits. Louisiana is a state rich in natural resources, heavily reliant on oil refineries and shipping. But the state government has historically handed out massive, multi-decade tax exemptions to these billion-dollar corporations, completely starving the local parishes of the revenue desperately needed to fix the sinking, pothole-covered roads. The median income here is roughly $57,000, which is already a struggle, but that is before you factor in the absolute, undeniable catastrophe of the property insurance market. Massive hurricanes have battered the coast year after year, causing major insurance carriers to panic, pack up, and completely abandon the state. Therefore, the families left behind are facing catastrophic, life-ruining premium hikes, sometimes paying upwards of $10,000 a year just to insure a basic, modest home. An exhausted homeowner recently ranted on a neighborhood app, saying, "My insurance premium just doubled again, so I guess I am officially working 50 hours a week strictly to pay the weather not to destroy my roof." The working class is being taxed by nature, ignored by the state, and priced out of their own heritage. If you think losing your family home to an insurance premium is the absolute peak of the American nightmare, just wait until you see the devastating, inescapable despair waiting for us in the top 3. The blistering, relentless desert sun beating down on a cracked adobe strip mall is your welcome to number 3, New Mexico. You can literally smell the hot asphalt melting under your tires as you drive past endless rows of payday loan storefronts. New Mexico officially markets itself as the land of enchantment, heavily promoting the wealthy, artistic enclaves of Santa Fe. But the reality for the actual locals is a brutal, exhausting financial nightmare. According to recent demographic data, the median household income is paralyzed around $54,000, while the poverty rate aggressively hovers near 18%. The state suffers from a massive, systemic reliance on federal funding, meaning the local economy simply cannot sustain itself organically. Because there is a massive lack of private sector investment, violent crime and property theft have completely hijacked major cities like Albuquerque. A frustrated local recently posted on a community board, saying, "We finally got a new grocery store, but they locked up the deodorant and baby formula behind plexiglass on day 2. So we are basically shopping in a minimum security prison." You are paying incredibly high sales taxes for a municipal government that cannot even keep the streetlights on. This brings up a massive, undeniable reality check. If you were forced to choose, would you rather live in a visually stunning desert with zero economic future, or a freezing, gray industrial city where you can actually get a decent paying job? Type your survival choice below. And if you think a desert trap is depressing, wait until you feel the cold, damp reality of a mountain holler that the entire country forgot about. The freezing, damp chill of a November morning in the Appalachian Mountains hits your lungs the second you cross into number 2, West Virginia. The air here perpetually smells like wet ash and rotting timber, a lingering scent of an industrial empire that collapsed and left its workers behind. West Virginia is geographically breathtaking, but those exact mountains have isolated the state, making it incredibly difficult to build modern infrastructure or attract out-of-state corporate tech money. The macroeconomic data here is absolutely staggering. The median income has plummeted near $50,000, and the workforce participation rate is consistently one of the absolute lowest in the entire country. When the coal mines permanently shuttered, the state was hit by a catastrophic opioid epidemic that decimated an entire generation of working-class citizens. Therefore, the municipal tax base completely evaporated, leaving local governments totally incapable of maintaining basic human necessities, like clean drinking water or functional bridges. An exhausted resident recently ranted on a digital forum, saying, "The town council just spent $1 million on a fancy tourism campaign, but my family still has to boil our tap water before we can safely give it to the dog." The state is essentially bleeding its youth, because anyone with a college degree immediately packs up their car and drives to Virginia, or Ohio for a chance at survival. If you think decades of isolation and industrial decay is the ultimate American tragedy, brace yourself, because the state at the absolute bottom of this list has weaponized systemic neglect into an art form. The suffocating, mosquito-filled humidity of the southern delta hits you like a physical wall as you enter number 1, Mississippi. Listen closely to the sound of a rusted screen door slamming shut on a condemned, overgrown property, because that is the official anthem of a state in total economic free fall. Mississippi is not just poor, it is the absolute, undeniable basement of the American economy. Recent official data shows the median household income staggering around a devastating $48,000, making it the poorest state in the union by a massive margin. But the tragedy is not just the lack of money, it is the total, systemic refusal to protect the citizens. Mississippi has historically refused to expand essential healthcare programs, leading to the highest infant mortality rates in the nation and the rapid, terrifying closure of rural hospitals. You have entire counties where residents must drive over an hour just to find a doctor who can treat a basic emergency. The state is suffering from the Great U-Haul Exodus, a massive brain drain where educated young professionals are fleeing to neighboring states by the thousands because there are simply no high-wage jobs available. The educational system is criminally underfunded, trapping lower-income families in a generational cycle of poverty that is statistically almost impossible to escape. A tired local summarized the brutal truth online, posting, "They patched the roof of the high school gymnasium with a blue tarp 3 years ago, and now the district just officially calls it the indoor pool." Mississippi is a perfect, terrifying example of what happens when a government abandons its working class and refuses to adapt to the modern world. The American dream did not just vanish, it was bought out, stripped of its parts, and relocated to a zip code you cannot afford. These 10 states prove that hard work is no longer enough if your local government is actively working against your survival. You have to look past the beautiful tourist brochures and look directly at the macroeconomic reality before you ever sign a mortgage. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe so you do not accidentally move into a zip code that will actively bankrupt your family. Question everything. Trust the data. Stay aware.